Welcome to the May edition of Casita Coalition's 2024 Building the Middle webinar series on ADUs and middle housing. I'm Rafael Perez, Casita Coalition Board Chair. A brief word about us. Casita Coalition is a cross-sector, statewide nonprofit. We believe that providing housing choice and opportunity for people of all ages and stages of life in every community is an essential foundation for a California where all can thrive. We're grateful to Casita's major sponsors, Wells Fargo, the San Francisco Foundation, and the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, as well as our webinar sponsors, the California Building Industry Association, the Law Office of Ruben, Junius, and Rose, for their support of our work. To save time, bio information for presenters will be in the chat. As a reminder, if attendees could use the Q&A feature for your questions, not the chat, that would be appreciated. So if you have a question, put it in the Q&A. Today's presenters are currently building multifamily ADUs in California, and they're going to share their experiences and some of the projects with us. Before we begin hearing from them, I'd like to welcome Jared Basler, Casita Coalition's Policy Director, to give us some brief background on the current allowance for multifamily ADUs in California state law and what's proposed in SB 1211, a bill authored by Senator Nancy Skinner and sponsored by Casita Coalition. Jared, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Rafael. Multifamily ADUs have become a powerful tool in ADU law statewide, and they are required by state law for cities to provide for certain allowances. Currently, that we're talking about the state exempt section of ADU law. And so in multifamily, when we talk about multifamily, if we remember that state ADU law cares about what's on the property, not what it's zoned for. So when we talk about multifamily, we're talking about a property with 2 or more attached units on the lot. And so in that scenario, state law provides for 25% of the number of units to be built as ADUs as conversions of unused space within that structure. And it also provides for 2 additional detached ADUs to be built. So seeing that not all properties are the same, and especially multifamily, we have high rises, we have walk-ups, we have large apartment complexes, and not all multifamily structures or properties are the same. So SB 1211 that we're working with Senator Skinner on is to provide more flexibility as far as where that allowance of ADUs can go on a multifamily property. And so in its current version, the version we hope stays, is that 25% conversions does not change, but it would allow for up to 8 detached ADUs on a multifamily property, given that the total number of ADUs do not exceed the number of existing units. So it would do quite a bit to expand the opportunities on different types of multifamily properties. And as it sits right now, it has just passed through the Senate, its first house, and it's moving on to the Assembly to go through the committee hearings in the Assembly before it gets out of the Assembly and goes on to the governor's desk. So we're about halfway through the process right now, and we're excited to continue working to make sure it gets through, and we hope you'll continue to support us. As we keep you updated on what you can do to help the bill continue to move forward. So with that, we'll get started with our first presenter, Julia Weiss. Julia, I'll kick it over to you.
Hi, I am Julia Weiss. I'm very happy to be here. I'm a development manager with Klingbeil Capital Management. I see I lost my slides, but we are here. I'm here to talk about the ADU projects that we are working on in California, and show you guys some photos of some of those projects. So a little bit about us. We're an owner, operator, and developer. We've been in the business for about 60 years, and we actually are nationwide. But what I'm going to be talking about today is obviously focused on California and focused on the ADUs that we're adding to our portfolio here. So sorry, are we gonna get the slides up? Oh, here we go. Awesome. Okay, so I kind of gave you guys a little bit of an overview on this. We're vertically integrated. And so as I mentioned, yeah, we're an owner, operator, and developer. One thing that I wanted to mention is our business right now is primarily in owning and operating multifamily with a value add strategy. We do have a smaller ground up development arm, but mostly what we do is owning and operating mid-size multifamily properties. You can go to the next slide. So I wanted to show a little bit, again, we're going to be talking about California today, obviously. This is historical, but I wanted to show kind of like the markets that we've been in. Right now we have about 6,500 units under management. And again, so sort of our concentrations are in California and in the DC area, but we've also been in these other states as well. You can go to the next slide. Okay, and so then just a little more context. So a typical deal or typical property that we own is garden style. We're in suburban locations in target markets. I won't go into tons of detail on what those markets are today, but essentially they're usually sort of high cost, high job growth markets. And then the buildings that we own and operate are around 100 to 300 units typically. You can go to the next slide. All right, so why we are here today to talk about ADUs. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why we're excited about ADUs at Klingbeil Capital Management, and also sort of why it's a good fit for our business. So first being that it's just a creative use of space. So we are always looking to optimize the properties that we own, because often we own and operate them for several years. We actually did sort of ADUs, I guess, before they were kind of called ADUs in some of our multifamily housing. Before the ADU law passed, we had just gotten some laundry room conversion ADUs permitted on a couple of properties that we had in California. So we like to think we were, sort of, and this was before my time, to be honest, but we like to think we were sort of ahead of the curve there. But yeah, we're always tinkering and looking to use space creatively. So that's sort of why we started doing this. And then in terms of the value add strategy, so I mentioned that we are a value add business, and we really look at that holistically. So we look at it as being able to optimize, management, because we are an operator as well. And then also sort of all aspects of the physical property. And we really view ADUs as kind of the very end of that spectrum. Obviously the deepest value you can add to a property is by adding units. And I think the other reason that this is kind of has been a good fit for our business is that the business that we're in specifically is some people look at value add as sort of a paint job and a landscape, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We look at it sort of more sort of in depth, probably sometimes to our own detriment. We tend to take on really sort of ugly, messy properties, and we're used to doing sort of construction or large scale electrical overhauls. So for us, kind of having this construction element of building new units is within our wheelhouse and just feels like a really good fit for us. And then I would say lowercase a, affordable. So this has been a great way to add smaller, more affordable units to the markets that we're in, which again tend to be these kind of high cost constrained markets. And so that has been great for us as well. And then last why ADUs? It's accretive. We are not a nonprofit. We are beholden to investors and our board. And we have seen tremendous value in adding ADUs, really because of the by right nature, getting around some of that, some of the regulatory tape and cost. It's just been much more, lucrative for us to add units through conversion to our properties that we already own versus developing units from the ground up, especially in these kind of funky times that we're in economically right now. We can go to the next slide. So I'm going to show you a couple of projects, actual projects that we've worked on. These are some photos of a project, an addition of ADUs that we did in Lafayette, California. So I just wanted to show a couple of photos. These are, you have the exterior on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side, some of the interiors. And if you go to the next slide, there's a summary. So if you guys don't know Lafayette, California, it's in the East Bay. It's a really high cost constrained market. There are very few apartment units there at all. And so essentially we converted 16 tuck under parking spaces into 8 studio units. They're really small, around 400, a little over 400 square feet. But we wanted to make sure that they didn't feel like an afterthought. So we really had high-end finishes, and big kitchen island, washer dryer. And they've been really successful. They rented very quickly and at relatively high rents compared to the rest of the property, I think just because of the newness of them. And also, we've been really happy with the improvement to the property overall. You can see kind of in the before and after photos that what used to be sort of unattractive tuck under parking spaces now look like nice ground floor apartments. So that was a project we did in Lafayette. And then if you go to the next slide, we're working on another project in El Cerrito, again in the East Bay. So we're adding 16 units here at a property called Village at Town Center. And we just actually completed 4 units. And so my photos are slightly out of date. But these were, rather than tuck under spaces, these were actually garage conversions. So you can see the garage door in the middle photo. And then to the left, what you're looking at used to be a garage door, a wall of garage doors. Then on the right-hand side, you see the kitchen, which again, we really put in sort of high-end finishes. This project was a little more complex because there are 16 units and 16 different floor plans, but they've turned out really beautifully so far. High ceilings, they definitely feel like they were meant to be at that property. But again, I just kind of wanted to show, we also had some issues with avoiding post-tension cables in the slab. And so, as you know, construction projects can always kind of go a little bit sideways. It's worth it. But I wanted to show a little bit of the challenge that we've had as well. And then you go to the next slide. So what's next? We have about 56 units in the pipeline using the ADU conversion law throughout California and properties that we own, primarily in the Bay Area and in Orange County. And I think we will get into, I think during the Q&A, some of the challenges. But top of mind for us in terms of what's next is really addressing outside challenges. So clarifying fees and timelines with HCD. I think, again, we'll talk about this, but a challenge for us has been every jurisdiction is different. There's still a lot of education around this that needs to happen. It's still relatively new. And again, these projects can be sort of complex. And then addressing internal challenges. We are trying to scale this because we're really excited about it for all the reasons that I mentioned. But it is, kind of a construction arm of our business, and there are challenges there, especially when we're trying to scale it and get all of these units permitted and built. But I can talk about that a little more later as well. So that's what's top of mind, but we're very excited for what's next. And I think I'm going to pass it over to Sean. There we go.
Great. Thanks, Julia. So hi, everyone. I'm Sean Roberts. I'm the CEO of Villa Homes. And if we go to the next slide here, actually, let's go one more past this one. There we go. Okay. So really quickly, what we do here at Villa Homes is we build homes. And what we specifically focus on is using volumetric prefabricated construction, where the home is built in a factory and then transported by truck and then placed on the end site. So everything we build is prefab, and we focus on infill locations. And really the fundamental thesis behind our business is focusing on kind of smaller entry-level homes like ADUs or cottage courts or pocket neighborhoods that are really, really undersupplied, and bringing prefabricated construction to those types of applications works really well. Our business is about 4.5 years old. We got started building ADUs predominantly in consumers' backyards, and we found pretty rapid product market fit with using prefabricated units to do that, because they're a little bit more cost efficient. They're really fast to build. There's a lot less risk associated with prefab construction and a lot less disruption when you're doing it in someone's backyard. So that worked really, really well. And then at the beginning of last year, we started to put a lot more focus onto multifamily ADUs, which we'll show a handful of examples of here as we go a bit deeper into this. But what we do at Villa really spans everything from designing the home, permitting the project, all the project management end to end. We're a general contractor. We work with a very flexible supply chain of third-party factories that build homes for us and our clients. And we're also getting into principal development of small communities of homes going forward. So lots of interesting ways to use prefab to get people into homes they can actually afford to live in. Okay, if we go to the next slide. This gives a little bit of a visual representation of what we do. So again, the homes that we build here at Villa are all built in a factory. We work with a handful of different factories all throughout California and in adjacent states, which allow us to keep transportation costs relatively low as we move modules into where they're ultimately going to be situated. The vast majority of what we do is built on a concrete stem wall foundation, which you can see in the upper left here. So almost all of our homes end up sitting on a foundation system that looks something like that. More often than not, we're building homes that are two modules wide. You can see in the lower left here, that's half of a home. And so that ends up coming into the foundation and then being attached to another home. And we can be in and out on these sites in a matter of weeks, minimizing disruption to the local community, or in the case of a multifamily property, minimizing disruption to existing tenants as we're putting these homes in place. And we can do this, pretty scalably and pretty rapidly, which is a really, really good way to get detached ADUs into multifamily applications all over the state. And it's becoming a very significant part of our business. So let's take a look at a couple examples of that. So if we go to the next slide, this is an example of a project that we built for an institutional client in Milpitas. So on this one, we added 2 ADUs to a 100+ unit apartment complex. These units were 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 800 square foot units, which are pretty much our average across what we build, both for consumers and for institutional applications. And here we were able to get in and out on site within 4 months, which is pretty quick compared to being able to build these on site. If we go to the next page, we can click in and see the inside of the unit. So these are really high-end units, great finishes and fixtures, and they functionally feel to the tenant like a detached single-family home. And what we've seen for many of our clients, and I think this asset is an example of this as well, these units will actually rent at a slight premium per square foot to the base apartment units in the adjacent buildings, because these are basically a detached home with no shared walls. There's no one living on top of you. It's brand new, and they work really, really well. If we go to the next slide, here's another example that we did down in Santa Cruz. So this was kind of an interesting project where we were able to add 4 ADUs on this one by converting some of the carports that you can see on the bottom right. So we added on this one 2 new detached ADUs, a large one at 1,200 square feet, a smaller one at 650 square feet, and then the 2 conversion units, which took those carports out and replaced them with ADUs. So in this example, we were able to add 50% to the unit count of this asset in Santa Cruz and provide, in this one, 3 additional 650 square foot homes that are pretty attainably priced for the tenant to be able to live in. So creates value for the landlord, creates housing in the local community at a pretty attractive marginal cost for those who are living there. We go to the next page. This clicks in to show the inside of those. Again, they look great. They fit like a glove, work really, really well in this community. If we go to the next slide, we'll just go through our last 2 examples pretty quickly. So here's another one where we did 2 slightly larger units in between 2 large buildings at a very large multifamily property down in San Diego. This one took a little bit longer to complete because of some relatively intense site complexity that we had to navigate, but it's a great property. The 2 units fit in like a glove into some unused parking space that was in between the 2 existing structures. So they fit really well. And if we go to the next slide, you can see on these ones we did something we do actually fairly commonly in Southern California, but we did a custom stucco exterior here to have these homes, even though they're new build detached units, look very similar to the existing apartment buildings, which were done in stucco a few decades ago. So they fit in really, really nicely and work well in the community. If we go to the next one, this is the last example here. Again, 2 more homes, detached units in Costa Mesa, which fit in, again, just like a glove, taking advantage of some unused land at this property, which was better used by both the landlord and better used in the community as housing rather than being some unused green space that really wasn't being applied in any kind of particularly well-used way. So in this one, 2 detached units, 800 square feet a pop. And if we go to the next slide, again, it looks great, really high-end finishes. This one also had the stucco match to conform with the aesthetic of the existing property. So this is what we do here at Villa. We focus exclusively on detached prefab home products, and in the ADU channel for multifamily applications, these 4 projects are a really good representation of what we're building. So that's us. And with that, I'll pass it over to Ian.
Thanks, Sean. Can I get to the next slide and get this? There we go. Great. So thanks for having me on the panel here. This is great. OpenScope Studio, we're a full-service architecture firm, offices in San Francisco and Los Angeles. We entered the ADU sphere in 2014, working with the San Francisco Planning Department to develop some guidelines for adding units to the city's existing housing stock. Once we finished what became the San Francisco ADU Handbook, we were tasked with engaging with City Hall and developing with the supervisors an ADU ordinance that included some consideration for how to add units to existing multifamily buildings. A lot of that effort, 2017, 2018, reproduced statewide once the supervisors that we were working with, David Hsu, Scott Wiener, and others, they were elected to the State Assembly and Senate, and then in 2020, the multifamily ADU rules kind of went statewide. We were fortunate to be able to follow up that legislative expansion and do multifamily ADU projects all over Northern and Southern California. So I'm going to be presenting case studies of how we've designed units to be added to 4 different parking configurations. I'm going to be looking at some street garages, carport conversions, tuck under parking, and podium parking garages. Next slide. Great. So the first one, 2775 Market. This was a 26-unit building in San Francisco's Castro district. So very dense, also very well served by transit. As is common in San Francisco, the entire ground floor was devoted to storage. And in this case, 9 separate parking garages that had been leased to primarily to non-tenants. Next slide. So the ground floor on the left, you can see the corner lot is really just lined with parking garages of various sizes, some 1-car garages, some 5- and 6-car garages. And then there was a side yard that had been given over to a driveway that also led to another parking garage for a half dozen cars. We converted 6 of those garages into studio and 1-bedroom apartments. And sorry, something just popped up. There we go. And we turned the concrete driveway into a landscape semi-private court that was accessible by a couple of the projects. Next slide. So here's the before image at the bottom of the slide. You clearly see just essentially a row of garage doors. We turned those into private unit entries with awnings, individual lights, and addressing just like a normal kind of ground floor apartment. We did provide a landscape buffer that once those plants grow in, we hope provide some kind of separation from the sidewalk. But we were able to add 7 very nice apartments to a very dense portion of San Francisco. We also, as part of this, is typical for closing off street garages, removed the curb cuts and did add in a handful of street parking spaces. This project was completed in 2021. Okay, next slide. Great. So 2350 Union Street, also in San Francisco, in a very dense neighborhood near the Marina District. Again, fairly typical for San Francisco, ground floor given over to utilities, a trash room, and parking. This time, the majority of the parking was at the rear of the building with several tandem parking spaces tucked under the building and then a freestanding carport. So sorry, next slide. I'm not used to transitioning slides here. So, so you can see the configuration, the diagram on the left just showing the empty parking spaces and then the filled in units on the right-hand side. So we replaced the tandem tuck under parking spaces with 3 studio units and then rebuilt the carport, taking those 6 parking spaces and turning them into 2 very nice 1-bedroom apartments with skylights and very nice interiors. Of course, that also freed up the concrete driveway, which we were able to transform into semi-private patios for each of the units, and then a landscape courtyard that actually became an amenity for the whole building. Next slide. We have some images of the building. So there, you can see the before, kind of the character of the driveway and the carport. It was a little sad and certainly underutilized, except for parking, again, of spaces that were primarily leased to non-tenants. It's somewhat unusual in San Francisco where you would have a parking space included with your apartment. So it really freed up building owners to lease to non-tenants. But we were able to create a quite nice outdoor space for this. It gets a lot of use by all the tenants in the building. This was also included a seismic upgrade to the entire building, and we were able to include some secure bike parking as well. We were pleased with that. Next slide. Just a couple images of the unit interiors, and the image on the right is one of the units that went into the carport. So again, we were able to provide some private patios and some very open and lighty and airy units in the building. I think one of the challenges on this one, the planning department determined that we were not able to change the volume of the carport. This has happened in a couple jurisdictions. So we weren't able to reframe the roof of the carport, despite it being deficient framing in a 70-year-old structure. So that kind of limited what we could do with our finished floor level and created some very complex grading issues and unfortunately a couple of steps up to the units that were in the tuck under parking. So that definitely complicated the site work and the planning of the units a bit. This project was completed in 2020. Very successful, great units. Next. All right, completely different context. This is suburban Pacifica, a huge complex that spans 3 parcels. Existing complex had 172 units in it. About half of those buildings were tuck under parking. So very large swaths of asphalt driveways, lots of tuck under parking, some on both sides, some of them double-sided tuck under parking. The site was also rimmed with carports, and there was also a surface parking. I think when the project was built, it was kind of a 2.5, almost 3-to-1 parking ratio for the units. So although the parking was well used, it was also a little bit overparked for what the building owner really felt they needed on the site. Next slide. So you can see the purple, the footprints of the existing buildings, and then these orange bars that being the areas of the tuck under parking that we were able to convert into 42 units that we added to this complex. As a condition of the lending, these are actually affordable, income restricted units and did contribute to Pacifica's affordable housing stock as they qualified for their RENA and affordable housing quotas. So hats off to Pacifica. We got this permitted in about 3.5 months, which having worked in San Francisco was an absolutely astonishing and very welcome timeline. It was great. The project was challenging, though. The entire complex was, maybe go to the next slide. I'm sorry. We have some before and after images. So as you can see in the upper left image, the before, the project had a lot of deferred maintenance. So in addition to trying to design, I really feel for Julia's comment of having multiple floor plans of really trying to integrate 42 units into tuck under parking that also accommodated laundry rooms, electrical closets, boiler rooms, on and on and on, et cetera. All of the miscellaneous back of house functions that we had to accommodate and maintain access for during construction. So that was very complex. We ended up providing a tremendous amount of utility upgrades, rebuilding entire building systems at the same time as trying to integrate these ADUs. But in these places where we had the double loaded tuck under parking, we were able to remove the driveways, demolish all of the asphalt, and what's currently under construction is very nice courtyards again that become amenities for the whole complex. Currently under construction, nearly finished now, though the units are finished. Next slide. Okay, my last case study here is a large apartment complex of podium buildings in Emeryville. If you're not familiar with podium buildings, it's a particular portion of the building code that really governs the configuration of having a parking garage. Sometimes there's commercial and retail on the ground floor, and then there's several stories of wood frame residential built above that. So there's a distinctive separation between those two components, the garage and the residential, until the building code changed. And now we are able to put residential under podiums. So we're able to leverage the ADU legislation to place units into these parking garages. Next slide. So in this case, we had 4 very large parking garages that we were able to place 15 new units around the perimeter of them. 11 of these units replaced parking directly. They were separated from the rest of the parking garage with CMU walls that we built. And then we cut new openings into the exterior to provide the windows and private entries for the units. We also added walkways so that each unit was connected to an adjacent sidewalk, and then re-landscaped that buffer. You can see the existing image in the lower left, kind of fairly typical parking structure with the bar gratings kind of looking directly into the parking garage, replacing that with large windows and private unit entries, awnings and lights and addressing, and the whole kind of very conventional ground floor units that don't look out of place in the project at all. We did this one was also a bit unusual. We did place 4 units in existing commercial and retail spaces that had never been leased since the project had been since the building was constructed. And this is generally reliant on local approval, as replacing retail and commercial spaces with ADUs is not mandated in the state code. So we had to work with Emeryville, with the jurisdiction, to get approvals to do that, and some specific eyes on how that would work specifically. All 15 of these units are built to current accessibility standards. All of them have wheelchair accessible entries and are adaptable to current codes. We were really pleased to be able to adapt that into the project as well. I think one of the challenges to look out for if you're doing podiums is these 4 parking garages were naturally ventilated. So they were using the bar grating to exhaust the garage. Once we closed those units, those openings up and put units there, 2 of these parking garages required supplemental ventilation. So we did have to add mechanical exhaust systems to 2 of these parking garages. It's just something that came up during design and code review that was definitely something to keep on your radar if you're adding units to podium garages. This is also currently under construction. Their units are complete, and we're just completing the walkways and the planting out to the sidewalks. So nearly done, and the units look great, really good units. That wraps up my case studies. I'm going to hand it off to Andrew Slocum, Green Development Company. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Next slide, please. Hi, everyone. I am Andrew Slocum, principal of Green Development Company and partner at ADU Brokers. First and foremost, we are advocates supporting policy for all types of housing, including ADUs. We regularly go to Sacramento to advocate for better rules, laws that affect all of California. We provide white glove service for development assistance for others. So we do about 70 to 90 ADU projects, ranging from 2 units up to maybe 10 units. And then also own about 5% of the project scope as our own, where every building that we own and operate has at least 2 units we're adding. We recently added a brokerage service component because we found many agents in this space don't completely understand or maybe are giving false information. And so it just helps as another vertical. We provide educational resources for free to people to understand permitting design, what cities do when they're reviewing, as well as the construction aspect, and then provide community building and opportunity for nonprofits. So we started a nonprofit to give permitting and design services for free, and then manage local government affordable ADU programs for Pasadena, West Hollywood, and also assist other municipalities on how they can implement other affordable loan programs. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to talk about the types of ADU projects and really what those stakeholders look like. We're going to go over what the individual property owner, what they're doing, private equity, what their projects look like, as well as REITs and institutional owners, as well as a more opportunistic developer that's looking at implementing ADUs on their new buildings. Next slide, please. So I kind of fall in this bucket as the independent property owner, where I will be buying something like a duplex or maybe 4 units, something like that, and adding ADUs to the existing property. Many of these have a conversion aspect, and it's typically like a smaller landlord or a family owner, and we're just more focused on maximizing our income and property value. This picture on the top right, those were 2 detached garage. Well, it was about 8 parking spaces in a large open space area, and we converted those garages into 2 units. The photo for the picture on the bottom was an open space in the back of the parcel, and that is 2 units as well. What's unique about this one is the open space at the bottom provides parking spaces for 4 parking spots, and we use the staircase in the middle to go up, and you have a unit on the right and a unit on the left. We used a Simpson strong wall to have a support for the overhang and also protect the staircase. If someone's coming up and down the stairs, you don't have a car coming directly at you if someone's parking. Next slide, please. So next we have our private equity fund or a family office, and they're more focused on a larger scale development on their portfolio of properties. So what we'll usually do is an assessment of, it could be 30 or 40 properties, and really identify which ones are the lowest hanging fruit to start with, and how many units we can add there. So the first 2 pictures, the top, those are both at the same parcel, and we're adding 7 units there. Those garages on the right are all attached to a 22 unit building. So those will turn into 5 1 bedrooms. And then if you look at the photo on the left, those garages are completely detached. So we'll look at adding 2 units there. But we may end up waiting and seeing if we can add more units instead with the passing of SB 1211. But that is a fairly large open space. So those were going to be 2 townhome style detached ADUs, 400 square feet on the bottom floor, 400 on the top. But instead of doing 800 square feet, we may look at providing 4 units at 400 square feet or potentially even more. On the bottom left, you're seeing what was a dingbat apartments complex, and we infilled those parking spots to provide 2 units, a 1 bedroom on the right and a studio on the left. Usually these owners have a significant amount of capital. They are not using any debt. Or when they're purchasing their properties, they're already adding in the capital to the acquisition, so they're not doing a capital call later. They're using ADUs to leverage and add to their ROI for their investors, and to give a diversification of unit types to buildings that may have been larger units, maybe family size, to allow for workforce housing or students, in the case of the bottom left building, to provide a more diverse housing stock to the area. Next slide, please. Next up, we have more of your institutional REITs or real estate investment trusts. And these are larger buildings, such as this project that we're looking at, which is in downtown LA and is a 13-story, 500-unit building. And with working with REITs, they're a little bit more strategic than some of the other groups that we work with. And they really are looking at how parking plays and how the units mix in with their other tenants and trying to make it more seamless, that it integrates into the property. They're also looking at mixed use spaces that were underperforming or are vacant and just no longer in use. They're also using ADUs as a way to add a shot clock to other projects that they need to have, such as redoing amenity spaces or converting underused spaces into something that's not housing. So by coupling accessory dwelling units with this other changes that they want to see, they're adding a 60-day shot clock to that to make sure that it becomes a more faster, streamlined process. So this project here, as I mentioned, is downtown LA, and we're adding 5 units, 5 accessory dwelling units, a gym, and converting a underutilized restaurant space that is now just being used as storage into more of a club room and an amenity space for the tenants. So it's a mix of adding accessory dwelling units plus rehabbing a building into a way to it's much more efficient, especially in a changing downtown neighborhood where what originally was required maybe doesn't fit to what the market is today. Next slide, please. The fourth type is more of your opportunistic developers that are looking at implementing accessory dwelling units in proposed buildings, which is a little bit of a newer strategy. As you'll see here, we're adding community rooms into the first floor, and then we have a community room in every floor going up. And this is looking at a way to add more density than what we originally would be working with, but also future proofing. Some of these may stay as community rooms and amenity spaces, but as those are no longer needed or we're able to change, it adds that flexibility to the property. We're also seeing this as a way to add non-deed restricted units to an affordable housing project to create a mixed income, which I myself am a big supporter of, is having multiple income in one building so everyone lives together cohesively, and it adds for a better community so everyone kind of raises the bar together. So this is kind of the 4 types of, let's say, stakeholders and the different types of people that are using multifamily ADUs to add housing stock into our communities throughout California. Next slide, please. Here's my contact information for anyone that wants to reach out. And I'm going to hand it over to Raphael. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'd like to welcome back all our presenters for a roughly 15-minute Q&A. Attendees, please use the Q&A feature for your questions. And if you can keep them general, that will be most helpful. All right, I know there was some in there. I can get started, and I think the first 2 came in during the first presentation. So those were for Julia, and one of those was, how much did your cap rate change? I guess that would be once you added all of these.
So we haven't actually done, these are buildings that we're holding for a while, so we haven't done a cap rate assessment. We've mostly looked at the numbers around kind of the value and sort of what we put in versus what we've gotten out. I'll say just numerically, we've been building them for around 150 to 250K a door, and ground up development in California is way over that. So that's kind of how we look at the value right now. And then we'll when we get closer to selling, if we do, again, we tend to hold for a relatively long time, we'll look at the cap rate.
Great. Another simple question that got put out there is contact information for all the presenters. So maybe you could just individually put your contact information in the chat. Some of the attendees want that. Let's see, looking at another one. Here's a question, and I think that will be for Sean. Where is the world of two-story prefabricated ADUs, and when does the ADU approach result in a less dense final result compared to multi-story towers plus garden and development patterns?
Yeah, I'll speak to the first part of that because the second part is a much more complicated thing to answer. Two-story ADUs can be done. Oftentimes it's a little bit more tricky because of the height restrictions. So doing one story is pretty easy. Going to two stories, you're dealing with other permitting pathways that are less by right. So we don't focus there. Physically, it can absolutely be done with prefab, but candidly, it's just not as compelling as doing single story for the most part. And the second part of the question, I mean, that's a much more philosophical thing that I'm not sure I'm equipped to speak to today, but I'm happy to chat with whoever asked the question offline on that.
Right.
Raphael, we can go with our prepared question too.
Yep. Go ahead and read that.
What are you seeing? What are the panelists seeing as the biggest challenges working with jurisdictions on these projects? And over the past couple of years, have you seen any changes in general with the landscape change with how they go at the jurisdictions? And Raphael, if you want to assign that to or take that question around the panel, that's great.
Yeah, well, anyone feel free to jump in on that.
I know specifically, in the beginning, 2020, 2021, cities were, it was obviously brand new for everyone but San Francisco, I think. And so, we saw a lot of different interpretation at the time. And I think HCD has done a good job at providing a lot of interpretation, but for those of you that are working, on projects now, does it seem like it's gotten better with jurisdictions, or have they kind of dug in?
I would say it has gotten much better. When we started, we've been doing multifamily ADUs for a long time, longer than most, I guess, at this point. 22, 23, we were still doing education on almost every jurisdiction we touched. I think just even in the last year and a half, there has been a shift. I think the ADUs in multifamily buildings are in the water now, and it's become much more simple, and we're met with more enthusiasm and acceptance.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think in the very beginning, it was very, I'd say easy because no one knew what was going on. And then it became a little bit harder. And then it cycled back to people understanding how strong these laws and the rules are, and then saying, okay, let's work with this instead of fighting against it. So in about 70 municipalities, I'd say even 2% of those are still really reluctant to adding multifamily ADUs, or maybe even have never seen them. But overall, I would say most municipalities have got it down and have figured out things such as objective design standards and updating their ordinances, or just following the state law.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can say one last thing. I do think it definitely has gotten easier and jurisdictions have gotten more educated. I will say it definitely does depend also, I think, on just what the city's priorities are. I know we've seen from cities where parking is an issue there, and it's not necessarily in an urban context like San Francisco, but in a more suburban context, when parking in neighborhood is an issue, that has been a concern. So I definitely think it has gotten better generally, but every jurisdiction is different in terms of their own kind of what's going on in their city. So I would say we've also come across jurisdictions where they're reluctant to go beyond what HCD has sort of prescribed, even when we think it makes sense for the community and would add more housing that they desperately need. We've found that a lot of times, unless they need to do it, they won't, even though they could. So I think that is kind of an ongoing element of this conversation.
Yeah. And then as a follow-up question, kind of thinking more about before we even get to working with the cities, obviously multifamily, as you guys all pointed out in your case studies, there are so many different configurations of multifamily housing across the state. What are some of the just challenges on the side of scoping out projects and understanding the difference between, you know, what happens on a single family home for an ADU, detached ADU, or even conversion? Like what are some of the unique struggles or challenges with multifamily that's different than single family?
I think one thing we continuously encounter is the upgrades to utilities, especially electricity. Many times the power and water departments don't get engaged until after we have a building permit, which leaves this big ambiguity of what we're going to be required to do. Even if we have calculations and diagrams that what we have there is sufficient, we still see requirements to propose upgrades that can be extremely costly and even at times kill the project. And we really don't know until we get to that phase at times.
And that, by the way, is where SB 1211 becomes really important too, because it starts to create the economies of scale of being able to do 4 units, 6 units, 8 units instead of 2. And then all of a sudden, all those really expensive utility costs start to get amortized over more units. And it's also more expensive than a lot of single family sites too, because oftentimes you're trenching through like asphalt through a parking lot for longer runs. And it's very different than doing it in a single family home context. So it's different.
I would only jump in to add, we frequently get involved long before utilities and things like that are considered in reviewing portfolios for feasibility of ADU projects. And usually the first question is, how much parking can you lose? And that will vary from property to property, but that's often a fundamental question on it's a go, no go. Can we add additional parking if we fill in this with ADUs? If we cannot and they can't lose parking, then there's no project, unless there's a tennis court they want to lose or a swimming pool they want to fill in. All right, it becomes much more complex site planning problem, depending on the answer to the parking question.
And that's been something that has come up in the discussions around 1211 parking replacement. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier is that 1211 also, so currently if you demo a garage or parking structure and replace it with an ADU, you don't have to replace that parking. And so what 1211 also adds in uncovered parking space. So I've seen some questions about parking lots and having to replace that parking. 1211 would also provide an exemption from replacement parking. And we've gotten pushback from committees on that question. And I think the people on this webinar that are doing these projects understand that owners aren't going to give up all the amenities just to add an extra unit, because parking is valuable as well. So it's not just about they can't force us to replace parking. It's sometimes we want to replace those amenities in order to maintain rentability and make sure that the property still works. So yeah.
All right. One of the other questions on there, and I will take a quick stab at it, is, are any units being built for sale? Now, I know that many multifamily homes are condo mapped, but as soon as you put an ADU in there, it's subject to prohibitions that most local municipalities have. So I'll put the plug in there for the implementation of AB 1033, which would then open up that possibility. But I'm assuming because no city has fully implemented AB 1033, that none of these are being built for sale. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah.
We haven't seen any clients using this pathway to build a unit for sale. And I don't think it really makes sense for the vast majority of owners and why they're building these.
Yeah, so that's what I assumed.
Especially on the multifamily side.
Yeah. And even those multifamily buildings that are already condo mapped can't condo map an ADU because ADUs are prohibited from separate conveyance unless 1033 is implemented. All right. So another question somebody asked was, what do the setbacks look like on these infill developments?
I can jump in on what current law is, and current law isn't changing. When it comes to setbacks are 4-foot side and rear setbacks for detached ADUs. In multifamily state exempt ADUs, it's 4-foot side and rear. Now cities can let you go, by ordinance, let you go closer, but that would no longer be considered a state exempt ADU that's required in the same way.
Yeah, usually we find fire separation distances are kind of the thing that actually impacts things more idiosyncratically at certain properties, for what it's worth.
Yeah, and I will say for conversion, we are converting some garages, actually a line of freestanding garages down in Southern California that are right on the property line. But because it's conversion of space there, we're not changing the footprint of the building. Obviously, that would disqualify you from the ADU law, but since we're doing that, then the setback is not applying there.
Yeah, agreed. I think what Sean had mentioned, the fire separation is really what controls that setback. 4 foot is kind of our standard, unless, like Julia said, it's an existing structure that maybe is on the property line where we're just using that 0 line setback. We have found some municipalities that have changed their setback to 3 feet instead of 4. I don't know really why they did that, but we used it, and they didn't place us out of the statewide exemption. So it was very interesting as well.
And it does seem like there's a mix of state exempt ADUs and local ordinance ADUs being built in these projects. So that we were curious about that. So it's interesting. You needed obviously some larger sizes and some other components that didn't fit in the state exempt units.
I think we have time for one more question. Has anyone seen multifamily ADUs included in the proposed projects in addition to existing? So for new construction, complete multifamily?
I showed the example on the last slide of a proposed building that had community rooms. I have a project, a 55 unit, 5-story building that's in entitlement right now that will have some ADUs that will be implemented after certificate of occupancy, or maybe some way during that process that we'll submit to have those converted. We're planning to have utility runs in them already, so the plumbing, electrical will kind of be there, and we'll add in the rest of the stuff that's needed when it turns into a residential unit. I'm seeing it more and more. I think it was talked about. I think it was a strategy, but we're also looking at it's a little bit hard for financing these buildings because your construction lender is not giving you the value of a storage unit or a community room as it would as a rental. So you're maybe needing to come up with more cash up front, or having a conversation with a lender that really understands this and the risks that may or may not be associated. So the financing side of it is really critical to whether someone's implementing this or not. I'm able to do it because we're using all equity and no debt. And so there is no risk of a construction lender needing to understand it. But that is a challenge that many people have faced.
Great, thank you. Well, those are all the questions we have time for. Thank you to all our presenters and sponsors. And on behalf of the Casita Coalition, our thanks to everyone who attended today. We invite other ADU and middle housing professionals, community-based organizations, and homeowners to add your voice and join the conversation by becoming a member or donating to the Casita Coalition at casitacoalition.org. You'll find lots of resources on our website, including guidebooks on subjects such as ADU finance, garage conversions, urban lot splits and duplexes, and many more. Links to our webinar library, our YouTube channel, and many more resources for both ADU professionals and homeowners. You can keep up to date on all our events and stay informed with ADU and middle housing news by joining our mailing list or becoming a member at casitacoalition.org. Thank you, and see you again next time.